Those of you who just arrived, my name is Michael Spath. I'm with the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace. We're based in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and this is our 20th year of standing in solidarity with our Jewish, Christian, and Muslim friends in Palestine, particularly the Palestinian Christian community and other Jewish and Muslim voices of conscience. We're the host organization for a 17-day, 10-city tour of Reverend Edwin Arrison and Reverend Rene from South Africa, and 14 drummers, the Full Youth Drumming Project. And Edwin and Rene will say a word about them, about this wonderful, wonderful group of young drummers during our conversation. I want to just say to all of you, you know, we were talking about Palestine earlier. In this Kairos Palestine document, they say that in addition to the many other ways that we can stand with them, they say clearly, come and see, and then go and tell. And again, if you take a look inside your programmed booklets, there are two opportunities. There's one for Palestine and Israel next May. It'll be my 18th tour. We not only visit the holy sites, but we visit with Jewish, Christian, and Muslim religious, political, and NGO leaders, and you can read about some of them in the flyer. Next October, Edwin and I co-lead a tour to in the footsteps of Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela to South Africa. So please consider joining us on one of those tours, and if not you, maybe then recommend it to one of your friends. Yes.
The dates for the next Desmond Tutu tour?
October.
So the dates are just from the 2020.
Did I put the wrong date? Okay. There'll be 2025.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. That's what happens when you cut and paste only part of the, thank you. I'll make sure that gets corrected. All righty. So we've talked a little, oh, and by the way, one of the questions that maybe we could have Edwin and Rene talk about, many of you, many church people around the United States picked up, especially in progressive churches, that wonderful image. It's a tragic image, but that very powerful image from Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, Reverend Munther Isaac, Christ under the rubble, instead of their normal traditional manger creche. We can have Edwin and Rene and I all are really good friends with Munther and his congregation. We've spoken there, and maybe you can say a word about that in a little bit as part of your answers. So I'm going to interview, ask Edwin and Rene just 2 or 3 questions, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. I'd like for you to, Edwin, you've described the Archbishop Tutu's philosophy of life with 4 J's. And I'd like both of you to kind of address maybe them: Jesus, justice, jazz, and joy. And so maybe, I don't know if you want to split them or just touch on each one, but I'll let the 2 of you work that out. Jesus, justice, jazz, and joy with the Arch.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for being here. We both Rene and I worked very closely with Archbishop Tutu. She reminds me, of course, that I'm older than her, and so I've been working with him since 1985 already. And I remember when he was the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches in 1985, and he was elected Bishop of Johannesburg, Anglican Bishop of Johannesburg. And I was in the room when he handed over to Beyers Naudé. Now, Beyers Naudé, we can have a whole afternoon conversation just about Beyers Naudé. Beyers Naudé, he was an Afrikaner theologian who turned his back on apartheid theology literally turned his back. And he walked out of the Dutch Reformed Church. Desmond was going to, some people would say he was going to become the moderator of the Dutch Reformed Church, and he would one day become the Prime Minister of Apartheid South Africa, if he did not turn his back on apartheid. But he did. And so when while Tutu was the General Secretary, Bayers was banned. He was at his house, and he could only see one person at a time, and there's footage of the Arch visiting him at his house and saying a prayer with him when he was banned. And so when Tutu retired as General Secretary, the Council of Church decided to hand it over this position to Dr. Bayos Lodier. And Tutu walked into the room on that day, and there was a real buzz in the room. There was maybe 300-400 people sitting there, and I was sitting quite close to the front. And Tutu was quite a small person, human being, and he walked to the front and he stood there. And he said to all of us, he said, we are crazy, he said. And then he said, particularly we black people, we are crazy. How can I hand over this very prestigious, important role in the church, I, a black bishop, to this white Afrikaners? He pointed to Bayes Lodier. He says, we are crazy. And then he stopped and he said, actually, I want to say to you all, we are all black. All of us sitting here, all black. There was a silence in the room because there was Germans sitting there. And, there were all kinds of people sitting in that room that day. We are all black, all of us. Some of you just came out of the oven sooner than some of us. and Tutu in 1985 was one of the few black leaders who could say something like that. Remember, Steve Biko was killed in 1977, and Mandela was still in prison. And so that tradition coming out of the Black conscious movement out of the 70s, and Tutu, he talks about himself as an accidental leader. He says, I'm only a leader because Mandela's in jail and Biko has been killed and so on and so forth. But actually he was the leader of leaders. He was the servant leader. And so the combination of justice and joy and of course Jesus, now for Tutu, towards maybe 7 years before he passed away, I remember visiting him, and I don't know if you remember this, but he was gaunt in his face. I mean, I thought when I walked away from that visit, how long will this man still be with us? I was really very worried. And I remember the conversation that we had at his house in the swimming pool there, and he said, everything, all that I do, it's all about God. It's all about God. I'm caught up in God. And he kept on repeating that over and over again in that conversation. And if there's one person who I think we were privileged to walk this earth with him, who really wanted to reflect the life of Jesus as best as he possibly could, it was Desmond Tutu. Let me just say one more thing, and then I'm going to give over to Rene. He did not just talk about servant leadership. He actually did it. And one story I can tell about him is I traveled with him up to the north of the country, close to the border of Namibia, and for a weekend while he was Archbishop. And we went to several different churches, and on the Sunday we had lunch at the family's house, and we after that we were going to leave. And as we ended the lunch, he got up and he disappeared. I thought, where's he going to? And we found him in the kitchen washing the dishes. And people would, no, Father, you shouldn't. He said, no, I want to do this, but I also want to actually teach these other men that it's not just your responsibility as the Mothers Union or whatever to do this. We are equal. And Rene can tell many other stories about that. But that was at least one example where I saw how he was, his daily life was trying to teach us about what it means to live a life of Jesus, through our own bodies. Let me stop.
I arrived late, my apologies, so I'm not sure what the question is, but Jesus, justice, jazz, and
Joy.
joy. He was very mischievous, always up to something. And yeah, I think he just would never listen to any instructions. I remember he was, when he received the Temple Award, and Mama Leah was in the congregation. It happened at the cathedral, and she told him, no politics.
Know what?
No politics. It was at the time when Jacob Zuma was president, and there was something that had just happened like the previous day. And he had to say something. The Templeton Award he received because of his work on forgiveness. And so he was supposed to say something about forgiveness. So you don't give a man like Desmond Tutu a topic and expect him to stick to it. So he said a little bit about forgiveness, and then he, sort of drift into politics, and then Mama Leah would just look at him and go, sorry, Mama, sorry, Mama. Same with the stage, and then he'll do this. And then carry on talking. He wouldn't change his tack or the topic at all. He just carried on, doing what he knew he wasn't supposed to do. There was one day when he invited me over for some tea, and I got to they were staying at this retirement village, and so there's the security gate you get to. So what they did was they made the security people phone his PA and speak to his wife, because he wasn't allowed to take any calls, because he would just let anybody come through. So I'm at the gate and I'm showing them, here's a message from the arch. He said I must be here at this time. Here I am. So now I'm speaking to his PA. Rene, you're not supposed to take messages from him. Like, what am I supposed to do? Archbishop Tutu's messaging me and telling me to come. I'm not going to tell him no. She's like, well, I'll have to get Mama Leah to speak to you. So Mama Leah calls me. She says, he's actually having a quiet day. He must have forgotten. So I said, oh, okay. So she said, but come inside and come have some tea with me. I said, okay. So in I go. She makes some tea, puts out some cake. And now he's in his office having his quiet day. And he walks out because he needs the bathroom. And he comes out, he closes the door. If Edwin is me, he's busy walking down the passage and he sees me, he goes, and then he comes, and if Michael is Mama Leah, he comes walking past and he does this to Mama Leah. He comes to me, he gives me a kiss, and then he carries on walking in the opposite direction as if we can't see him because he's covered his face. So it was just, that for me is mischief and joy put together. And the Jesus part, I would say, is that his life was governed by prayer. He was a mystic in many ways, with a very monastic spirituality. And Edwin was talking about sitting outside by the swimming pool. We were sitting one Sunday afternoon, finished having lunch, you know, your belly's full, the sun's shining, life is good. And he's sitting and he goes, and he gets up and disappears. And so I look at Mtunzi, his son-in-law. Mtunzi goes, it's probably 6 o'clock. And I looked at my watch and it was bang on 6 o'clock. His body knew it was time to go pray. He had such a disciplined life of prayer. At 12 o'clock, if you were around him at 12 o'clock, he would just withdraw from the conversation. And he would say his prayers quietly. And when he was done saying his prayers, he would re-enter the conversation. And so that was just such a part of his life that actually he could feel in his body what time it was, because it was time to pray.
I want you to talk about youth empowerment in post-apartheid South Africa. And there's a drum sitting in front of you. And the drummers, the young people who are with you, the young people who have come with you on this 17-day tour are part of the Full Mood Youth Leadership Project and Full Mood Youth Drumming Program. So talk about the program, but also in the context of youth empowerment in post-apartheid South Africa.
Thanks for the question, Michael. I think it's such an important question because many people stress about youth ministry. I mean, I've been a youth minister all my life, and I breathe it. I live it. It's the most normal thing for me. And I do think that the church, in a sense, needs to get with the program. Actually, when we talk about young people in South Africa at the moment, we are talking about young people who know that, first of all, they know nothing about apartheid. They were not born during apartheid, and yet they have inherited the legacy of apartheid. So something that happened many years ago is now their burden as young people. And that's why we have something like more than a 60% youth unemployment rate in South Africa at the moment. More than 60% youth unemployment rate in South Africa. It's one of these shocking things that people don't often realize about South Africa. There's a certain structure to the economy, and that structure to the economy prevents new people from entering into the economy, and young people are the victims of that system. They are the first victims of the system. And so when they leave matric, when they finish their high school, the choices are very limited. A few would go to colleges and universities, but that's perhaps less than 10%. What happens to the other 90% of young people? And those are the ones we work with in particular. Young people who have written themselves off, who have been written off by their families, who have been written off by the churches where they are, who have been written off by their society. And they come to us. We formed this Full Mood Youth. Now, Full Mood is an Afrikaans word. It just simply means full of hope and courage. And it's a place, a retreat center in Hermanus, a beautiful area. That place was formed in 1936 in the middle of the state of emergency in South Africa. So they formed it as a place of healing and wholeness and reconciliation and so on. And in 2016, I was asked to be a trustee of Full Mood. And naturally, I said to the trustees, well, if you're going to talk about these things in moving into the future, it will not be possible to actually move into the future without young people, because all the founders were getting older, and of course they were stressing about the future of Formwood. And so we launched the Formwood Youth Leadership Training Program on 16 June 2016. If you know anything about South African history, 16 June 1976 was when the youth, the young people, school children, took to the streets of Soweto. So that was the commemoration of 40 years of that we decided we were going to launch this youth program there. And when we launched, it was a 10-week residential program. And when COVID hit, we could not continue that. But that made us rethink what we do. And we pivoted towards working with local young people. And so we focus on these, what we call townships. And this is where there is the greatest poverty. The area where we live, also where the Arch Capital Fire, has the biggest gap in South Africa between the wealthiest and the poorest. You have billionaires who live there, who have holiday houses there, and then you have the kind of young people we are working with living in a shack in Zwelithini, in the township there. And we work with the young people, but we connect them with the other part of town. So we kind of act as a bridge between these two sectors. And on a Thursday morning, 10 o'clock, we have a Eucharist service at Formwood, and then that's when you see the whole spectrum of that community gathering there. We have no choice. After COVID, we decided that we were going to focus on drumming, that we were approached by people who were involved in drumming. And they convinced us. I mean, we had to be convinced first to do it, because we operate under certain themes. To be very brief, the themes are peace and justice, reconciliation, healing and wholeness, beloved community, and creation and creativity. Those are the 5 themes under which we operate. And so I asked the question, what does drumming have to do with any of those 5 things? And we discovered actually that drumming is about community. There's therapeutic, there's something therapeutic about drumming, and so on. And that answered enough questions for us to be able to continue in that way. And then the next step was that these young people are unemployed. They don't know what to do every day. And we decided that the right thing to do was to actually begin to make drums. And I don't know if I should give you any detail about how we make those drums, but that's from pallet wood. These pallets. Wooden pallets. Discarded wooden pallets, we recycle and upcycle them. Cut it up into 18 pieces, and we make those drums. And so every single day, the young people are actually busy making those. And so the ones who are traveling here with us, I mean, they would never have even gone to a plane in South Africa, but they have come all this way here. And when I met with their parents, I said to the parents, these young people work every day. They don't get paid, but they work very hard. And it is important that they experience the fruit of their labor. So they've come on this tour now, drumming for unity and healing. And Michael Spath and Rene and others will tell you what happened in Fort Wayne the last few days. We've had amazing events there, working with thousands of children and young people. And on Tuesday evening, we had a service at Plymouth, a drumming session at Plymouth with maybe 200, 250 people. I don't know how many people there were, but it was as if joy broke out in that place. I said to someone, for me, it was like a sign of the kingdom of God that we saw there, and that's been amazing. And so we are in Indianapolis for the Percussive Arts Society convention over the next few days. Let me stop. Right. Thanks, Mike.
Edwin and I was trying to think where I met you, Edwin. I have no idea. But the consequence of that meeting is Edwin has dragged me along to a bunch of things.
I think it might have been exactly,
Could have been.
or just before that.
And I asked myself, how is it that I keep saying yes to this guy? Don't understand. Actually, I don't generally just say yes to people, but Edwin seems to ask the right questions. But I think every time Edwin is organizing something, I see this consistent trend. He brings young people along. He gives young people opportunities. We were talking about Kairos, Palestine, a little earlier on. The 30th anniversary of the Kairos document had visitors coming from all over, including Palestinians coming to, present papers, and there's the who's who of academia and Kairos theology. And the people who were hosting the sessions were young people. And some of these young people actually don't give two hoots about people's CVs and, their titles or anything. And to introduce someone, they would just, say, oh, so now we're going to hear from Edwin, on a first day basis. And people come in and, they were hosting the conversations and facilitating things. And you could see some of the older people were like, these kids. But Edwin was there, giving them responsibility, giving them, sharing his platform with them. And at every turn, he's always centering the voices and the needs of young people. And so that's something I feel deeply called to. And so it's easy to say yes, Edwin, because I trust your heart. He works with these young people every day. He won't tell you this. He doesn't get paid for it. Every day of the week, Edwin is there in a township, driving them up and down to go buy this and to go fetch that. And he knows their hopes. He knows their parents. He knows so many things about them. They love this man. And he does it for absolutely no return. I'm one of the leaders of VWLTP, and I know we can't afford to pay him salary, but he still does it. And so I know that might embarrass you a lot, Edwin, and that's not the motivation for this conversation. But what I'm trying to say is that this is not about a job for him. This is a vocation that he lives out daily. And so it's easy for me to find ways to partner with you, because firstly, it's something I'm also passionate about, but also I trust his motives. And I think the other thing is that even with the arch, his love for young people and for children, when Archbishop Tutu retired, one of the things he did was once a month he would go to the public library. He would just walk into the library, go sit in an armchair, take out a book and start reading out loud. And children would just begin to gather at his feet.
Wow.
And he would have an hour of reading children's stories, and then he would get his car and go home. And so his commitment to young people is also his commitment to VWLTP. When we launched this program, he endorsed it. He would meet with the young people, sit and talk to them. And so, yeah, I would just say it's a privilege for me to be able to be involved in this work. And while you look at this drum, you see, oh, they make drums. I just want to see, don't be mistaken. We're not drum making. We're growing leaders. We use making drums as an excuse to gather them and develop their skills, because we need to be growing the leaders of the next generation. And that's why we do it.
Sure.
I have a number of other questions, but I think let's open it up to you all. Dan, you had a question earlier, and then we'll open it up to the rest of you for other kinds of questions and comments. Thank you, Dan.
As we were trying to have conversation about Palestinian issues, it is obviously, we don't live in that part of the world. It is hard for us to find certain things to resonate. In this country, we have, for example, a growing movement that is very unsettling to many of us called Christian nationalism. And it has seeped its way into the political arena. And as it does so, that governmental leaders, like here in Indiana last week, for some of us, we feel very unfortunately, a lieutenant governor who is a self-proclaimed Christian nationalist was elected. And we question, many of us may question, does that person and that movement fully represent who we are as Hoosiers, who we are as Americans? Gaza has been governed since 2007 by Hamas. Hamas is professed and recognized as an Islamic Sunni nationalist organization. And so in this country, Christian nationalists may not really represent who the spirit of American citizens are. The question is, for me, does the Hamas organization, which governs technically since 2007 Gaza, and has done things that are difficult, does the Hamas organization governing Gaza, do you believe it truly represents the Palestinian people?
Thank you.
I can say so many things to your question. Let me think where to start. I'm assuming this now, that you do not think that Donald Trump represents you, or Donald Trump represents America, the spirit of America.
I
Right.
think he is the head of a movement that envelops Christian nationalism
Right.
as an aspect of it.
Okay, and
that is a challenge.
and not only is it a challenge, does it represent the American people?
Exactly.
So the thing that people like myself and others, we are Democrats. Even if someone gets elected that we do not agree with, we have to accept that that person has been, or that party has been elected. Now, in South Africa, we have a term that's called state capture. I don't know if you've heard the term, state capture. So under the former president, Jacob Zuma, we effectively gave over the presidency to a family from India, the Gupta family. They captured him, and then they captured the whole of the state. They captured the revenue services, they captured the treasury, and so on and so forth. And we had to think ourselves out of that, knowing that this doesn't represent who we are. But it's a party that was known as a party of liberation. But somehow we got into that situation where, because this family came and entrenched themselves into the system and then gathered a lot of people with them, and then decided to take each part of, they cut up the state into many parts and say, you take over that part, you take over that part, and ultimately control the whole thing. The presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa that we have at the moment was the antidote to that. We had to, and then we had just soon after he was elected as president, he instituted what is called the Zondo Commission. It's the judge, our Chief Justice, for many months had to, in a sense, let the pus out The wound had to be opened, and we listened and we heard testimony for days on end of how this state that we were trying to build, this new democratic state, was actually being captured. Now, I mentioned that because I don't think the American citizens realize the extent to which your state has been captured. I mean, there's been a state capture. What we experience in South Africa is nothing compared to what you're experiencing here. Your state has been completely captured, and I can mention many forces, APAC being one of them. But it has been so completely captured that you, the citizen, cannot really say that this isn't democracy anymore. And so the question that you would need to reflect on is how do we as citizens imagine and then recapture our democratic state and our democracy. So as much as I am against the very notion of a Christian state, and I'm against the very notion of a Jewish state, and I'm against the very notion of an Islamic state. Bishop Tutu got into trouble because many Christians, so-called Christians or Christians, wanted the word God to be in the Constitution, in the current South African Constitution. And Bishop Tutu reminded them that actually the old apartheid constitution started with the words, in humble submission to Almighty God. That's how the apartheid constitution started. So he said, there's no need to have the word God in the constitution. We must all respect, even though we are majority Christian in South Africa, we must make sure we respect all the different religions. Eventually, the compromise, and if you read our constitution today, there's a preamble, and the preamble says, Nkosi sikelele Afrika. God bless South Africa. God seën South Africa. And in several different languages says the same thing. Because the activists over the years said, actually, we used to sing that hymn, Nkosi sikelele Afrika. Why can we not just put that into the constitution if this is a concern that certain people have? But make no mistake, it's a secular constitution. And Bishop Tutu himself was very much against this compromise and this sort of lowest common denominator kind of engagement, when people say, and the politicians, when they get together, oh, can we have a moment of silence? And then we all have a moment of silence. Tutu said, no. We must hear the voice of the Hindu. We must hear the voice of the Buddhist person. We must hear the voice of the Christian. We must hear the voice of the Jewish person. And it's only when we start hearing the voices that we will be able to grow in respect for these, our brothers and our sisters. And Christians have a duty actually to make sure that this happens. Jewish people, Muslim people, Hindus, Sikh, whatever people must never feel that we want to dominate them. They must feel that there's a spirit of equality that we want to build. And so despite the fact that there are these movements, we, the citizens, have the responsibility, I think Rene mentioned it earlier, we now have to make sure that, this would be something we experienced in Plymouth the other night, if you saw what happened in Plymouth the other night, wow, despite the fact that there are people here in our country who who want us to represent something else. This was like a revolution against that, a rebellion against that. And I think that rebellion must continue. And so, as much as I dislike, say, something like an Islamic state, I cannot say to the people in Gaza, and I understand, I'm very involved in the conversations. I actually understand why they made the choice they made. The Palestinian authorities are just corrupt. The Palestinian Authority actually is not doing anything. They are collaborating with Israel. And so if people see this kind of thing happening, they're like, who are going to be our leaders? Who can be the most courageous amongst it? That's why they made the choices they made. Not something I necessarily agree with, but that's the kind of choices that they make. And one has to respect that. I'm going to stop there.
I think the other piece is the historical one. Hamas didn't exist
Mm.
forever. It hasn't always been around. Benjamin Netanyahu himself went to lobby Jordan for money to give to Hamas. This is documented. We need to ask who the benefactors are.
Mm.
Who benefits from the existence of Hamas? When you talk about a two-state solution, there needs to be a recognition of two states. At the moment, there's only one state that is recognized. And so as the build-up comes towards the Palestinians becoming a state, that's not in Israel's best interest. So they begin to fund a second party. Israel created Hamas for political ends, to divide the Palestinian people so that there would not be a Palestinian state. That doesn't get spoken about, but it's in our history books. And I voted for the ANC in the first democratic election we had in South Africa. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher called them a bunch of terrorists. Anyone fighting against the apartheid government is a terrorist. And before Mandela could come to the USA, his name had to be removed from the list of terrorists.
Mm.
So when you wave that word around, this one is a terrorist, that doesn't, that's water off my back. I fought against apartheid. I, according to your government, was a terrorist. And so, I mean, even in church, you say, oh, that's very Marxist, or that's very socialist. And we give power to words that need deconstruction. I am equally opposed to an Islamic State. We have to ask, what role are they playing? How do they serve the narrative, the bigger story? I voted for the ANC. I'm not voting for terrorism. There is a small minority. The MK is a wing within the ANC. It doesn't make everyone in South Africa a bunch of terrorists. And there's this narrative around Islamic this and Islamic that. There are churches in Gaza. The Ethiopian eunuch was baptized. You know the story in Acts? Philip baptizes him on his way back to Ethiopia, through Egypt, in Gaza. There's a church there, third oldest church in the world. What? This is not just about Islam. It's about the nationalization of an ideology and a whole bunch of political systems built around that narrative to continue to reinforce one narrative. And we know that there's never only one side to a story.
I would just add that it's surprising to so many of us that it took so long for this explosion that happened on October the 7th, because the Palestinian people have been so patient for so many years and have engaged in nonviolent struggle. And so a nonviolent struggle for year after year and decade after decade for 76 years has no impact and doesn't change the reality on the ground for individuals and for families, that it's not surprising that eventually there'll be some sort of explosion. And it's also possible to hold two things. You mentioned this, cognitive dissonance, right, Rene? It's also possible to hold two things together in your hearts and minds at the same time. One, you can reject armed struggle because as Christians or as human beings, we embrace nonviolence. On the other hand, with the various blockades and the rationing of nutrition and food coming in and the closing of fishing in the Mediterranean and the the embrace of oil fields off the coast of Gaza by Israel, and now the development of northern Gaza by the Israeli government, all with US support, and $3.8 billion a year for the last number of years under the Obama administration, which increased the aid. When you squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze people, unfortunately, but of necessity, there's this sort of just eruption and explosion, and people are going to react. And so I often just ask about what would happen if to our own families. How would you, and I'm not talking to you, Dan, I'm talking to general, but how would any of us react with scores of family members bombed and killed over the years, and all kinds of other houses destroyed and fields destroyed and all the rest, livelihoods taken away and refugees and all the rest? It's a messy business. It's a messy business. And, many of us clergy types, and I include myself here, I mean, we have this, especially in the progressive churches, we have this idealistic version of, Gandhi or King, or, as if they happened in a vacuum. And it was just because of them that change took place. There was a whole variety of responses to oppression that the change occurred. So Dan, your question is such a critically important question for us to ask of ourselves, because it strikes at the heart of the Christian response. So I really am appreciative of it. And I saw Chip and I saw Chad.
Can I just quickly,
Yeah, please,
one
Edwin, go
little
ahead.
sentence about it. And I'm going to say this very quickly. If you close all non-violent options, as has happened there, and if you extend that to closing the space on BDS in the US and so on and so on. If you close all non-violent options, there is actually only one thing that's going to happen. And so we should not be surprised at all.
Chip, and then Chad, and then Ron.
I've worked with domestic batterers, and the most important question I found to ask in an intake was, what's the most traumatic thing that's happened to you in your life? And then working with
Sorry, Vanessa.
ministry in the church here, partnership with Sri Lanka, working with the Tamil Tigers, I found that there seemed to be a lot of resonance between the microcosm of a family violence situation and the larger situation. I'm wondering if you see any resonancy in the idea of trauma, the need to address trauma in violent situations.
I think the work we are doing and discovering around trauma is absolutely essential in this work. On the evening of the 7th of October, I heard stories being told about what was happening. This is worse than the Holocaust. This is worse than Hiroshima. The comparisons that were being made, which were completely disproportionate to what was happening. But within the Israeli national psyche, the trauma that still lives there means that anything gets blown out of proportion. I mean, 41,000 people, it's self-defense. There's a disconnect there. If someone killed someone you love and you went and killed, what, 40 times the amount of people in self-defense, that people would say, you're traumatized. There's something else going on in your psyche. You can't just kill so many people. And so we all have traumatized bodies. And if we don't do that work, regardless of where you sit in this conversation, if we're not asking how trauma is impacting our bodies, it will affect how we respond to everything. And I would say our bodies, I'd go as far as to say, our bodies is the most sensitive. We don't learn to read how trauma has affected me and causes me to respond to things, then everything else I read in the news or anywhere else will be affected through that lens. And in terms of the sort of broader narrative of what happened on that particular day, yes, there was violence, but we have to find bigger language for what we mean when we say violence. Because to starve a group of people for 17 years is violence. I work in an international NGO, and I talk to them about institutional violence, the things I have to endure in my Black female body because of the way some things get said. So there are many ways in which violence continues to impact us. The world is orientated towards white male supremacy. Racism isn't if Michael says something to me. Racism is a systemic construct. I might experience a moment of prejudice, but when I go to the bank, I'm still a Black woman. The interest rate I pay is because of racism. It is a much bigger system of violence and discrimination that seems to continuously impact the same people repeatedly. And so it isn't just an occasion of trauma. It is the compounded, intersectional nature of trauma. When you speak to an abused woman, she's abused because she's a woman. She's abused because she's living with a violent partner. She's abused because the police system is not sympathetic to the stories she tells. She's abused because she is the primary caregiver for children most of the time. And so there are so many things that intersect the injustices that compounds the impact of the injustices, which is the primary source of the violence. So I think when it comes to Palestinians, they live at that intersection of the most compounded consequences of macro and micro aggression and violent thinking.
If Chip, when you asked the question about trauma, we just showed as part of our Indiana Center series, there's a wonderful, so when I say wonderful, it cuts to the heart of this issue of trauma. Dr. Gabor, Gabor, Mate, M-A-T-E, is a Jewish, family Holocaust survivors, Jewish physician who deals with trauma. And there's a film called Where the Olive Trees Weep. And it talks about his working with Palestinian groups. And of course, he brings in his own family history as well in this work. But something you can show, to a group in your home, and something you can show in a congregation, Where the Olive Trees Weep. It's powerful, powerful, powerful chapters.
Edwin, Rene, we just had an election in this country, as you know, and Rene, you spoke so eloquently to it earlier, which I really appreciated. And I will just name for myself, one of the emerging concerns that I have is this, I would use the word promise from our president-elect to deport millions of people.
Yeah.
Our particular conference and the United Church of Christ in this area and region took a trip in 2020, just before the pandemic, to the southern border with one of our border churches that works on matters of immigration. And we crossed over into Mexico. We saw the border wall. We talked about ICE and Border Patrol and all the things they face on that part of the border in this country. But we all know that's one specific instance of immigration. Indiana's very far away from there, but we face questions of immigration to come in the months and years that are ahead. The people in this room are people who work alongside of immigrant communities. Some of them are immigrant communities. Immigrant congregations. There's fear, there's worry, there's concern. How do we work together? And it gets to your theology question, or Rene, of like, how do we navigate this understanding that we are all children of God? How can we treat one another as though we are not? But that is what is going to happen. It is a promise that will be what will happen. Millions, billions of dollars will be spent to move people from this country to another country. And so much of that, of what you all are talking about, is resonating in my mind and right now with that particular issue in this country. And those of us in this room, I think it would be helpful, at least for me, as that's to come, what might wisdom you have for how we might work together and navigate that theologically, spiritually, communally, because I'm very concerned about what that might mean for real lives, real lived lives.
It's an important question for people here, for all of us, but especially in this room.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jane.
I think dealing with fear and what that does to us is important work. What happens when we feel afraid? So that does go back to trauma. But I think from what I hear in the US, people are feeling like they are losing their country. The whole MAGA narrative is about reclaiming something that actually didn't exist.
Right.
And so there's nostalgia is very powerful. And the Second World War was punishable by death. You would make others nostalgic, and then soldiers would become useless to you. And so there's a longing. That's all I hear. There's a deep longing for something. And within the imagination, if there isn't a longing that is big enough for all of us, then we need to learn to tell better stories, I would say. We had a conversation about immigration in California a couple of years ago, and there were two Indigenous people part of the conversation. And we simply asked the question, how long has the US been struggling with immigration?
Yes.
And everyone around tables had to talk about where was your great-grandmother born? And then where was your grandmother born? Where was your mother born? And where were you born? To see the movement of geography. And that for decades, people have been going from country to country in search of a new story. And what if that is the story of the US? That this is a land that you can come to if you have a big dream. Because that is a story that needs to give space for all of that. We in South Africa, I don't know if you heard the stories back in 2008 of the xenophobic attacks that happened in South Africa. The derogatory term for immigrant in South Africa is kwera kwera. And we developed a series of Bible studies that was called Jesus Was a Kwera Kwera. reading the story of the angel visiting Joseph to say, your son's life is in danger. Take your things and cross a border. Go to another country for safety. And over, there were Christians who read this, who said, we heard the story a million times, but never ever thought of Jesus as an immigrant. And to find the story of your Savior, who now becomes the one in need. Like with Jesus is the one lying under the rubble. Jesus is the one crossing the border. And then looking through, the scriptures, the orphan, the alien, the widow. Who's that alien? That's the immigrant. When Abram was called in Genesis 12, it was go to another land. And so the story of God's people on the move, the exiles in Babylon, Jeremiah 29, this glorious verse everybody knows. It's written to an immigrant community who were displaced through violence. And so I think the Bible is a lot more subversive than we care to believe. And it's so rich with text and texture of the God who invites and the God who pitches God's tent to live among us. That God in Jesus becomes the immigrant. And then to ask, so how do we live more faithfully into that story? And in every context that will be different. But that for me is a helpful place to stop, I guess.
And the only thing I will add to that is the practical issues. And it's again about relationships with the other, building deep relationships there. So when that other person is affected, you are affected as well. And we might have to go back to the moments where we have to hide people in our cellars, in our churches, I mean, if that was what needs to happen, it needs to happen. And because that will be the only way in which we can practically express what our theology says. Otherwise, we don't only abandon people, we abandon Jesus, actually. And that's what we must be careful about. So anyway, we can talk about this.
2 quick commercials before we move on to the questions. About 13 years ago, Peter McCary in Cleveland invited about a dozen folks from all around the country to come to Cleveland to talk about organizing a support group for our sisters and brothers in Christ in Palestine and Israel. And out of that came, and I was one of them who went, was invited, out of that came the United Church of Christ Palestine Israel Network, UCC PIN. Sarah Offner Seals from this conference, one of my pastors, is now presently on the coordinating council of UCC PIN. I would encourage, if you haven't already, or if you don't know about it, please check UCC PIN's website. The United Church of Christ and the Presbyterian Church, and now the Mennonites, have been in the forefront, in the avant-garde, in standing in solidarity and unity with their sisters and brothers in Christ. UCC PIN. And you've had now 2 people from this conference, myself, as one of the founders, and now Sarah Offner Seals, who went with me on a solidarity tour last year, who's now also a member of that particular Palestine Israel network. Please check out the website UCC PIN for lots of resources. It's really pretty, the work that we all are doing together through UCC PIN is really important. The second thing is, as I mentioned, right here in Indiana, we have our Indiana Center for Middle East Peace. And if your congregation is in need of someone to come into, I'm happy to come. I'm very sensitive pastorally sensitive to the various contexts in which congregations are living, in which pastors have to deal. And I'd be happy to come and talk with your congregation about Bethlehem stories, our sisters and brothers in Christ in Palestine. So reach out to me, Michael Spath. On the front of your program is my email address, and we'd be happy to do that. Ron, and then I saw a hand back there.
Go ahead.
Please, please, please. Thank you.
So my name is Mutante Clark. I'm also South African architect. I have a question about racism. I'm nearly a born freak, but I'm not. So I grew up under this idea of reconciliation, the idea that we are moving forward towards a world where we are all created in the image of God and we all kids from God, right? And then I think what has been jarring is this election. I think for the first time, it's like, wow, racism is real. I knew it's people, like this is like, okay, there's just a couple of more people left that they need to maybe travel more, need to meet people, need to engage people that are not white. They will see that like God is in all of us. But then when you see this election and then when you saw the American map and you saw everything is like great, you know, and then it shows and you listen to Trump and the way he talks about people of color, the way he talks about women, the way he is like racist in a way that's kind of scary to see on national TV. And then you see American people vote for him, saying that he is probably amplifying whatever is in their heart, right? I'm in a church context, mostly African American, and then there's a lot of trauma from people that not so long ago they were in the civil rights fighting, you know, not so long ago, I live in Louisville, we were all talking about Black Lives Matter, and for a moment it seems like we were all in agreement that racism is not it's not good. Racism is pure evil. I believe without a shadow of doubt. If you are a racist, that is a sin. You know, I'm not a heaven hell type of Christian. It probably will be a place for you there. So my question is, how do you, when you guys have been fighting for freedom for such a long time, how do you continue to like keep hope?
Yeah.
You know, and then how do you continue to like to grieve, but like not grieve for too long to a point that you like forget that we're supposed to be united, we're supposed to love each other, you know, and then how do you tell people that have just experienced like violence, what Trump is doing is violence. The election results is violence. It shows in the country's agreements that if you're a Black person, if you're queer, if you're an immigrant, you are not in God's creation. And that's what they voted for. That's what they are going with. So how do you, one, be a good pastor under those conditions? And as a woman who's Black, how do you not hold on to like the grief and the disappointment that comes with that type of decision by the whole country? It's not like it was like a couple of 20,000 million people. It was like over 70 million Americans say the things that Trump said through the election. You know.
Yeah.
Rene and Edwin, I got a high sign from back here. They didn't hear the question. If you could just very briefly repeat kind of the issue and the question and then go ahead and respond, please. Thank you very much for your comments and your questions. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mutaleho, for your question. As I understand it, you're asking how do you keep going? Especially as a Black woman living in this country when the election results sent a very clear message that more than 70 million people are in agreement with Trump about his ideas about Black people, about his ideas about women, about his ideas about anyone who was not born in this country or is queer or, you know, has family south of the border of the US. The words of Desmond Tutu came to me immediately. And a Palestinian woman asked him this question: how do you not give up? And he didn't even think for a minute. He looked at her and said, "We are resurrection people."
Mm.
Resurrection people means that even when evil has done its worst, we know that resurrection is coming. So I would say that's the first thing. The second is that in this work of pursuing justice, it's my lifelong calling. Hebrews 11 talks about this hall of fame of the people of faith. It was by faith that this happened, by faith that was happened. And then, I can't remember which verse it is, but it's maybe around about verse 13, where it says, these people died without seeing everything that they believed for. As a Black South African woman, I was offered a scholarship at age 18 to come to the US and study theology. And in part of the application, we weren't allowed to have passports. And so I was offered a single exit visa. I wasn't going to be given a passport. It meant that if I left the country, I would leave and become an asylum seeker in whichever country I landed first.
Mm.
And I would never be able to return. And so I didn't take up the offer because I wasn't going to leave South Africa with no hope of ever returning. And at some point in my calling, there was always this Jeremiah quote: before the foundation of the earth, I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. And it kind of made me giggle because it was like God didn't know that I didn't have a passport. You know, I mean, how are you supposed to go to the nations when you can't even get a travel document? And so I had this dream that one day I was going to go overseas. One day. I didn't know which country. One day I would go overseas. You can ask Edwin. I think that this is my 10th international trip this year. And from here I head to England and then I go back home.
And then it was cricket, 6 days.
Yes, and then I watch cricket. But the point is, I burned through, I have a maxi passport that's valid for 10 years. I have 2 passports at a time, and every 5 or 6 years I need a new one. That's how much I travel. And I'm not trying to say that as a, look, I travel. But the moment I got on my first international flight, the dream was too small. I dreamed that one day I would go overseas. If I dreamt that today, people would call me ridiculous. What I need now is a bigger dream. And so the dream for justice and liberation is a worthwhile dream because it demands my whole life. And even after I die, it requires more than me, more of me, and it is an eternal achievement. We know, because we are resurrection people, how the story ends. But it is my life's work to continue to hold out hope, to continue to dream. And I hope that when I die, I would not receive all the things I hope for. Because I want my life to long for more and bigger. It's how I know that my life is dependent on God, not me. I only dream of things I can achieve. How boring would that be? And what I said to someone a little earlier on, the work is bigger than me. And the flip side of that is that sometimes it can be painful. Again, that's why we need community.
Mm.
We are never asked to walk this road alone. Even when Jesus sent out the 72, go in pairs. Because we need the encouragement of one another. We can't do this alone. Some days I weep. Some days it hurts that I physically feel pain in my body. Watching images come from Gaza. Nights and nights and nights and nights of not being able to sleep. Of just living with a lower grade grieving that is there all the time. And at the same time, in community, being able to dance on that. Watching Palestinian children celebrate Easter Sunday morning. I don't know if you saw any of those images. Screaming and shouting like it was the best news in the world. He's risen indeed. So, yeah, I'm sorry I get preachy sometimes. Or maybe all the time, but I think the combination of having a bigger story that you live in, because the story of where we are now is not the only story, and it's not the story of where we're going.
Yeah.
But to remember that we don't walk alone.
Ron, we've got about 5 more minutes. Ron, you want to make a comment or question, and then we'll
Yeah,
wrap it up.
I will. My name is Ron Caldwell. I'm a orthopedic surgeon. I'm not a pastor. I kind of a cradle of discipline, dad, grandpa, and all that. I went with Mike to Palestine in 2012 and changed my life. Went back with him in 2016 for a different trip, to the solidarity trip, to study Palestinian nonviolent resistance. So we just stayed in the West Bank, and the highlight was we got tear gas by American-made, American-financed tear gas canisters in Nabi Saleh in 2016. Went back with my wife in 2018. She went with me in 2012. And so I just got passionate about it and have read thousands of articles, books, and so on. And then the other life-giving, life-changing, this is a commercial from Mike. The other life-giving trip was last September to South Africa. And so Mike said, as I were leaving in the US, he says, hey, I want you to do 4 talks when we get back to 4 talks to the church at Emmaus Road Mennonite church, where I go with him occasionally. So I did. So I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles and put together the most extensive talk was comparing South African apartheid and Israeli apartheid. So here's one thing, irony, I think of. I thought of a million things to say, but in northern Gaza, where all this has happened, where the fence was breached, and when you talk about, remember Mandela the terrorist, I saw a headline that said, Palestinians, Sharpeville. Sharpeville is where the South Africans murdered 170 some, shot, got people in the back, 1960, early 60 something, when they were just protesting the hated pass laws. And Mandela said, that's enough. I've been working for, again, this will be paraphrasing, basically that's enough. I've been working for nonviolent stuff for 20 years. And he went underground and he helped form the ANC's military wing. In 2018, from one spring to the next, the Palestinians of Gaza did a non-violent, every Friday after prayers, walked to that fence. Now here's the irony, to that fence. In 1956, Moshe Dayan with the patch on his side, the general, he sat there in those probably very kibbutzes in southern Israel and said, we need the helmet and the gun. They hate us here just across the border because we're on their land and villages. So that 2018, they marched every week And the Israelis made a great big burn, whatever, of dirt, so that their snipers could stand up 150 yards away, and they brag how many amputees they created by shooting at their knees. And right on that berm was a bleachers that the Israelis would cheer. Wow, it was great entertainment. And then the other thing I wanted to say was, my wife said to me recently, like, Ron, I don't know what somebody asked about what to say, with your congregation. And my wife said, Ron, you're so, I don't know what to say. I mean, you've read all this stuff. I can't quote any of this stuff. I said, honey, you and I have probably a relatively unique experience in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We've been to Palestine twice. We've seen the Jewish-only roads. We've seen the occupation. I've been tear gassed. He wasn't. We've seen the wall. And now we've been to South Africa. And these people, and Tutu and Alan Busak and Jewish South African rabbis, they all say, oh yeah. Now Ta-Nehisi Coates goes there, and he goes, oh yeah, that's Jim Crow. Well, it took me a day to look at this. I know what this is. My mom would know what this is. That's Ta-Nehisi Coates. And all these great friends that I love dearly now have said, oh yeah, we've been saying this for 20 years.
Yeah.
We saw it, it's worse.
Yeah.
It's not only apartheid, it's worse. So I just said to Janie, somebody, you don't have to quote all these articles or statistics. To me, you just say, you know what? You don't have to believe me, but these are what my friends have told me. And this is what I've seen in these two countries. I've walked the townships in Soweto. I've walked the townships where these young people are from. Anyways, so I wanted to say that because these people, and I just met Rene, but they have really, really, really enriched my lives. I love them a lot. And go with Mike to Palestine, and go with Mike to South Africa.
Thank you. Thank you.
I did not pay Ron to say that. Ron, thanks for your passion and your partnership. I'm aware of the time. Edwin and Rene, would you like to say anything to wrap up? And then Chad, I'm going to let you close. I want to just say thank you to Margaret for helping us to promote this program. Chad is a partner and a friend and a leader, and who I respect so much. The Indiana-Kentucky Conference is dear to me. I'm a member of Plymouth Church in Fort Wayne. And I just want to say thanks to all of you for taking a day and to come here, and please interact with Edwin and Rene before you leave today. So Edwin and Rene, and then Chad, and I'm going to sit on that. Okay.
For me, thank you for all the questions and the comments. Having been an activist now for at least 40 years and remaining an activist, that does require a spirituality and spiritual practices. And Bishop Tutu said it best one day when he was preaching. He said, actually, we're all kettles. But we must be filled daily with water, with living water. And we must pray to God to fill us daily with living water. And then he said that even if you're a kettle filled with water, you must still be plugged into the bigger source. And then he said, and then you must be switched on. And so that must be our daily prayer. That we be filled with living water, plugged into this bigger source, goodness of love, of justice, of reconciliation. And that we are constantly switched on. That's my final word. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I want to say thank you. I come at this work because of Jesus. And what I believe Jesus says and teaches. And so to be able to live out my conviction and and have a microphone to speak my convictions, that's a privilege. And for making the effort to come and join in this conversation, I want to say thank you. Thank you for the privilege of being able to share what God has done in and through me with you. And I pray that what God does among us will continue to be of benefit and service to the world out there.
You.
Rene and Edwin, want to say thank you for your wisdom, for your courage, for all the travels that you are making, all the difference that you are making in the lives of so many. I'm going to walk away from today a different person because we heard your words. So thank you for your presence with us today. This event was brought to you by the Indiana-Kentucky Conference. That sounds like a commercial.
PBS.
Sponsored by the Indiana-Kentucky Conference of the United Church of Christ.
like you.
Yes. And so we are grateful whether you are part of the United Church of Christ or any other denomination or no faith at all. We are so glad that you are here. I hope that you were able to gain something from today, that it strengthens you and inspires you and empowers you. Michael, thank you for helping make this happen, and for Margaret for all your work as well, helping us along the way. We're going to say a word of blessing upon our dear colleagues and friends, if that would be okay, and a blessing upon the rest of our day. Please travel home safe wherever home may be. Let us pray. Oh God, we give you thanks for this moment and for your servants, Rene and Edwin, for the ways in which they show up in the world, for the love and compassion they show their neighbor. Bless them with your strength, with your courage, with your wisdom, with your understanding. Surround them in community so that they know they're not alone. Uphold them. Hold them in your tender arms of care in the moments when it's hard. In the moments of joy, may it bubble up in such laughter and presence and hope. And may that also be true for all of us. That as we walk from this place, we do so bound together in your love and in your community and in the person of Jesus that inspires us to go and live a life of justice and of joy and even jazz and Jesus. God, we thank you for this moment together. Help us not to lose hope, but to go forth in your hope as people of the resurrection. In the name of Jesus the Christ, we pray, go forth in God's peace. Amen.
Amen.